Today is a historic day for our country. After decades of failures, impoverishment, decline, and lawlessness, today we formally begin the path of reconstruction. Since we took office just 8 working days ago, we have been focused on trying to contain the enormous crisis we inherited. To that end, we have designed a shock stabilization plan that includes a fiscal adjustment program, an exchange rate policy that has aligned the exchange rate with the market value, and a monetary policy that involves cleaning up the central bank. We are making our utmost effort to try to lessen the tragic effects of what could be the worst crisis in our history, the result of decades of governments that have insisted on failed policies. Because, as we have said throughout all these months, the problem is not the chef, but the recipe. Those ideas that failed in Argentina are the same ideas that have failed all over the world. Because wherever they have been tried, they have been a failure economically, a failure socially, a failure culturally, and on top of that, they have cost the lives of millions of human beings. That doctrine, which some might call leftism, socialism, fascism, communism, and which we prefer to label as collectivism, is a way of thinking that dissolves the individual in favor of the power of the state. It is the basic foundation of the caste model. It is a doctrine of thought that starts from the premise that the reason of state is more important than the individuals who make up the nation. That the individual is only recognized if he submits to the state, and that, therefore, citizens owe allegiance to its representatives, the political caste. In other words, individuals are nothing more than a means to the ends of the state. It is a way of seeing the world that consists of the belief that a group of men, the politicians, are superior to the rest of the individuals, and that, therefore, they should be the ones to rule the destinies of their fellow citizens. A doctrine based on the idea that a group of bureaucrats sitting in an office can plan the lives of millions of human beings, taking into account their desires, abilities, preferences, and circumstances. It is a doctrine that considers politicians consequently to be omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent. That is to say, essentially, it is a doctrine that considers politicians to be God. Well then, we have come to tell you that not only are politicians not God, but they are the cause of our problems. They are the cause of our problems, because for decades they have defended these impoverishing ideas we talk about, while they themselves became richer and richer. Because it is the relentless implementation of these ideas for more than 100 years that has gradually, step by step, led us to the economic hell we live in today. The process has been gradual, and along the way we have become accustomed to and accepted as normal state interventions that are the root of our problems. The result is the country we have inherited, the worst legacy in our history. A country with a consolidated deficit of 15% of GDP, where 5% of the deficit comes from the Treasury and 10% from the central bank. A country that spends so much that it can't even pay for it, not even with the highest official tax burden in the world. A country with no reserves in the central bank and with its creditworthiness destroyed. A country that has printed money equivalent to 20 points of GDP to finance that public spending. And now, as a result of this reckless money printing, is facing its worst inflationary crisis in 40 years. A country that was on track to crash into an annual inflation rate of 15,000% and that urgently needs a change of course to avoid disaster. That change begins today. A central aspect of the failure of the last 100 years is the interference of the state, that it has had in the lives of the citizens. From that belief that politicians are superior beings who must rule over the destiny of each of us, an institutional framework emerges that makes it so that no one can work, trade, move about, or get an education without their permission. Whereas in a free society, everything is permitted except what is prohibited. In a collectivist society like Argentina, everything is prohibited except what is allowed by the politicians. This stands in clear opposition to the spirit of our liberal constitution, which sought to restrict the arbitrary power of the state. in defense of the life, liberty, and property of individuals. Over the past 100 years, politicians have been busy expanding the power of the state at the expense of decent Argentinians. This expansion of the state has been accompanied by the greatest destruction of a country's wealth ever recorded. Our country, which at the beginning of the 20th century, was the world's leading power, over the last 100 years it has been trapped in an endless cycle of crises, all of which have their origins in the same place, the same cause, the fiscal deficit. In fact, out of the last 123 years, in 113 of them, we have had a fiscal deficit. And of the 22 crises that Argentinians have suffered throughout our history, 20 have had a fiscal origin. But since the political class has never wanted to address the root cause of our problems, they have systematically resorted to debt, money printing, or raising taxes to cover this deficit. The consequence of these decisions is that Argentina is the world's top serial defaulter. We have wiped out our currency 13 times, destroyed 5 monetary systems, experienced 2 hyperinflations without wars, and have the highest official tax burden in the world. What must be understood is that the problem is the deficit, and that the solutions politicians resort to, far from fixing the problem, actually make it worse. The use of debt as a continuous mechanism to finance the deficit and the inevitable default only serve to increase risk. This leads to a rise in country risk, higher interest rates, a drop in investment, and ultimately miserable real wages. Monetary issuance, as has been demonstrated both theoretically and empirically, is the sole cause of inflation, which is a hidden regressive tax that distorts price signals, destroys investment, and erodes the purchasing power of Argentinians. The indiscriminate and continuous increase in taxes undermines the property rights of Argentinians, discourages saving and investment, and consequently also results in miserable real wages. To solve the problems caused by the various mechanisms politicians use to finance the deficit, instead of addressing the root cause, which is the fiscal deficit, politicians introduce regulations, price controls, currency restrictions, bureaucratic obstacles, and rules that violate the freedom and property rights of Argentinians, hinder economic calculation, and destroy wealth creation. As a result, the state as a whole, it has become a machine that blocks trade, work, production, saving, investment, wealth creation, and economic growth, and fundamentally, freedom. The consequence of this is that Argentina is a country where 50% of the population is below the poverty line. More than 10% of the population lives in extreme poverty in a country that produces food for 400 million people, with a tax burden on the agricultural sector of 70%. The state takes the food of 280 million people, while 5 million Argentinians do not have enough to eat. Private employment has been stagnant at 6 million jobs for more than a decade. Per capita GDP is 15% lower than it was in 2011. A third of formal workers are poor. We have a low unemployment rate, but it's explained by precarious jobs and miserable real wages. And 6 out of every 10 children between the ages of 0 and 14 are poor. I want to pause for a moment on this figure you just heard. 6 out of every 10 children between 0 and 14 years old are poor. That is the tragedy we are living through, the result of a political and economic model that goes against freedom. Nothing is more important than reversing this tragic trend that mortgages our future, and that is why we focus on the importance of human capital as the engine of economic growth. Well then, today we are taking the first step to put an end to the model of decline. Today I have signed a decree of necessity and urgency to begin to untangle this legal and institutional framework, an oppressor that has destroyed our country. Since our economic model, unlike everything that has been done in the last 100 years, tackles the deficit, which is the root cause of our problems and not just their consequences, we can begin today to untangle all these regulations that claim to offer solutions but only create more problems. The decree of necessity and urgency that we are presenting today is finally meant to begin the process of economic deregulation that Argentina so desperately needs, so that we can begin to grow. Among many reforms, the decree includes 1. Repeal of the rental law so that the real estate market can function smoothly again and renting is no longer an ordeal. 2. Repeal of the supply law so that the state can never again violate individuals' property rights. 3. Repeal of the gondola law so that the state stops interfering in the decisions of Argentine merchants. 4. Repeal of the binational law, which only benefits certain actors in power. 5. Repeal of the price observatory of the Ministry of Economy to avoid the persecution of companies. 6. Repeal of the industrial promotion law. 7. Repeal of the trade promotion law. 8. Repeal of the regulations that prevent the privatization of public companies. 9. Repeal of the state-owned companies regime. 10. Transformation of all state-owned companies into public limited companies for their subsequent privatization. 11. Modernization of the labor system to facilitate the process of generating genuine employment. 12. Reform of the customs code to facilitate international trade. As of today, it is forbidden to forbid exports. 13. Repeal of the land law to promote investment. 14. Amendment of the fire law. 15. Repeal of the obligations that sugar mills have regarding sugar production. 16. Liberalization of the legal regime applicable to the wine sector. 17. Repeal of the national mining trade system and the mining information bank. 18. Authorization for the transfer of the total or partial share package of Aerolíneas Argentinas. 19. Implementation of the Open Skies policy. 20. Amendment of the Civil and Commercial Code to reinforce the principle of contractual freedom between the parties. 21. Amendment of the Civil and Commercial Code to ensure that obligations contracted in foreign currency must be paid in the agreed currency. 22. Amendment of the Framework Regulation of Prepaid Medicine and Social Security Organizations. 23. Elimination of price restrictions on the prepaid healthcare industry. 24. Incorporation of prepaid medicine companies into the Social Security regime. 25. Reinstatement of electronic prescriptions to streamline service and minimize costs. 26. Amendments to the pharmaceutical companies regime to promote competition and reduce costs. 27. Amendment of the companies law so that football clubs can become corporations if they so wish. 28. Deregulation of satellite internet services to allow the entry of companies like Starlink. 29. Deregulation of the tourism sector, eliminating the monopoly of travel agencies. 30. Incorporation of digital tools for procedures at motor vehicle registries. These reforms, of which I have only mentioned 30 out of more than 300 included, are some of the reforms contemplated in the emergency decree that we signed today. The goal is to begin the path of rebuilding our country, to return freedom and autonomy to individuals, and to start dismantling the enormous number of regulations that have hindered, obstructed, and stopped economic growth in our country. But this is only the first step. In the coming days, we will call for extraordinary sessions of the National Congress and send a package of laws asking Congress for its cooperation to move forward in this process of change that society chose in a context of crisis that requires immediate action. The deputies and senators of the nation will face the historic responsibility of choosing between being part of this change or obstructing the most ambitious reform project of the last 40 years. In order to finally be able to set in motion the productive forces of Argentines and begin to walk the path to becoming a world power once again. I trust that our representatives will defend the interests of Argentines and not those of the elites who have benefited for decades from this system, an impoverishing system. If we move forward on this path and do so with determination and resolve, I am sure that our country will return to the path of growth and progress that we once knew. Therefore, I want to thank you. May God bless the Argentine people, and may the forces of heaven be with us. Thank you very much.